Lemon Williams, thanks very much for joining me today. How are you?
I'm doing great. Good to be here, David.
Likewise. Listen, why don't we start by easy part? Walk me through memory lane. Just how you got to be a CISO. Maybe you can go all the way back to even the childhood. What made you interested in techie things? Whatever you want to share with the audience.
Oh, okay. Well, I started my career in IT about 20 years ago, but I originally had a degree in business, and I thought I wanted to work in trading and finance, and I got my dream, but I found out I was a terrible trader. So I lost a lot of money trading commodities for energy companies. But what I did have is fantastic books in terms of my keeping records of all the money I was losing. And the company was wanting to increase their technology, and so kind of move away from things like Excel and move into ETRM systems. And they sort of liked that I had this rudimentary knowledge in IT. I could do basic programming, macros, that sort of thing. And they said, that's great. You understand the business, and you have a some IT acumen. We're having a hard time communicating with people in our tech group exactly what we need. And that role was sort of born. Is that my first job was being, I guess what we call today a business analyst, but being a liaison between business and business operations and software development. Went through that process, kind of worked in the energy field with the first energy trading risk management software, then control system software, so SCADA and supervisor control and data acquisition software in the energy space. Um, did that for a few years, actually was way better at IT than I ever was at financial trading. And then right around the early 2000s, in the energy space, you had security regulations come along. Up to that point, security, well, it almost wasn't something that I remember. I mean, coming from, the prior to that, security was just putting your password on a sticky note and sticking it on your monitor. Because we were mostly in the development area concerned about speed. It was processing speed. We wanted to get things done faster. We wanted to be able to basically ingest more data and get it and analyze it quicker and quicker and quicker. The security kind of came in as government regulations. This was post 9/11 kind of came through, and it was kind of dropped on my desk. It was like, okay, this is just one more thing for you to figure out. It's probably a fad, who knows? But they want us to increase our security, so we're going to figure out how to do that. Um, that became what I didn't know at the time, is that agreeing to take on the cybersecurity regulations in the industry and agreeing to take on the remediation for that was going to be what I was going to end up doing for the balance of my career. So pretty much early mid 2000s forward, that has been something that has been my main role, my main job, and kind of makes me unemployable for anything else really, because my head's so full of security things. So from there, I got my CISSP certification, really became a security advocate, and worked on some of the standards drafting teams for some of these, became sort of like, um, uh, worked on a lot of the think tanks that kind of go into what the intent of these are, what the reality of them are. So, I worked for the government, I've worked, private industry, and ultimately then sort of started consulting for this, sort of branching out to it. So that's sort of what got me all the way to here one day it was like, well, we just have to figure this out. And it's like, it's just going to be a speed bump. And now we've moved all the way to here, David.
Isn't it quite remarkable when people meet, senior folks like yourself, you've done a lot, sometimes they feel that it was planned, meaning that you had that in mind, you always wanted to be that. And more often than not, it just seems like you were the right time, the right place, and then you you went out of your comfort zone and you accepted the new task or a new role that wasn't even in your wheelhouse, but it just so happened to you were there,
Yeah.
that day, and that was a fork in the road where you took that completely changed your entire career path. Is that a correct statement?
That is absolutely correct. It was not planned, and did not see this as being a career.
Yeah, and in these early days, like there wasn't. Now it's cybersecurity is hot, and a lot of people want to get into it, and they always ask how. But back then it wasn't even. It was just IT, and people
Mhm.
did IT security. They had some IT security controls on top of IT roles, right?
Mhm. It really wasn't a path. I mean, that path is actually kind of new, and I see the same thing where people want to know, what's the path, what's the progression, and it's like, well, for a lot of us old timers, what we call gray hairs, sort of in the security industry, we're like, none of us, had a path. There was not a job. CISO was not a job at that point. So we tell them like, we come from generalist sort of backgrounds and fields and try to, apply just what we call common sense controls to things. And so we're like, well, learn as much as you can about how business operates, what's important to their resiliency, to reliability in private industry, how your company actually makes money, and then let that guide you into exactly, what you think about security, because it usually will go hand in hand. Use an analogy a lot that, security is different for a bakery than a bank. I mean, it is, and they both need security to the extent that they're somewhat digitally enabled or dependent on technology to get their jobs done. But they're different. They're just not just like the rigor you take to them, but just the overall approach of what exactly are you protecting. Your risk profile changes, so the things that you emphasize on are going to change a little bit. So that's one of the things that I really do try to get across to a lot of the younger people is that there's something that you need to know about the way things operate. Are you in manufacturing? Are you in a financial sector, a health sector? That goes hand in hand with everything about security, because without that, you could have a lot of academic background. It's amazing now because you've got everything. You've got cybersecurity, data analytics, cyber engineering. You've got all, computer science and computer engineering with, minors in security. You can have a lot of that. You can have a lot of certifications, but without some way of making that practical and personal to the thing you're protecting, without just a little bit of, maybe along with that, study manufacturing, or if you want to work in aerospace or defense or healthcare, without some understanding of that, it's going to be very hard to be effective tactically and be effective outside of an academic structure.
And speaking of understanding the business, I want to double click on your commodity trading experience to start with. So you glanced over it, but I would say that first of all, it's a very tough role to begin with. There's a lot of moving parts. So people don't realize how much goes into trade. So aside from the technical aspect of it, there's a lot of knowledge that you have to absorb. And a lot of it is STEM. Like it's just, you have to understand how things operate. And can you relate some of those skill set that you had? And I also say that you had to be pretty comfortable with risk,
Mhm.
which can be applied to your job today as a cybersecurity professional, where you have a certain comfort level with riskier endeavors. Talk to me about the things that you learned as a commodity trading, even though it wasn't your calling, but it set the foundation to be a successful cybersecurity professional, if there is any.
I think you hit on the main one, is understanding risk. So risk is always a part of everything we do. It is never going to be cost effective enough to, I guess, prepare 100% for every, potentiality. And it will not only be not cost effective, just not effective overall, because you'll prepare yourself out of it. That is something that works in commodities trading as well. A lot of it is, you're taking educated guesses. You're looking at things either going to fall one way or another way. And you're trying to find through, quantitative analysis. Well, if I think it's, 51% this way, 49, percent chance it'll go this other way. You're looking for those things that will give you that inkling of what to choose. And you're using a lot of data, and you're using a lot of, just analysis and gut feeling to sort of understand that. Well, that does actually translate a lot into modern day what we look at in cybersecurity, because we're looking at resiliency. We're looking at what are the most likely things that happen, what are the things that we need to protect the most, and what are going to be the most valuable things to protect. So we look at things, we categorize things in different levels on different tiers based on what their impact is. And I think you actually, you see that a lot in terms of when we're talking about trade floors, commodity trading as well. That idea of, this is the most likely thing. If I look back, how am I going to look at my decision set? What is my decision set based on? Is it based on something that's grounded? Understanding that it still won't happen that way 100% of the time, but making sure that you have just educated justifications for how you do things. And you have some sort of documentation of what your methodology was for it. Same thing with companies and cybersecurity. We have to come up with a methodology. Going back to, are you a bank, or are you a bakery? What is the methodology that we're going to sit in place for what are the most important things that could happen to you, and how do we mitigate the highest probability or the costliest risk? And sometimes maybe at the expense of the lower probability, but also least costly things. So I think in both, there's a lot of determination of value of one thing relative to another.
So you mentioned gut feeling. Do you find that CISOs today also employ our microbiome, which we call like the second brain, in decision making, despite the fact that we have all the analytical tools out there and the frameworks and the peer review and so on and so on?
Yeah. Again, so, you might ask 10 cybersecurity professionals and you get 12 different answers. So this is just me speaking for me. Absolutely. There is an emotional IQ part that goes into it. One is going to be because of the industry that you're in, and the market that you're in, and what the risks are associated with that, be they, whether security risk just inherent to a certain area. The other big part of that is that your people, your users, your user base, those are sometimes your weakest links. So there's a cultural understanding part of the culture of your company that you need to understand. And that really does go on gut. That really does go on the prioritization of what they're going to do. Also, people tend to have, certain behaviors. Every corporate structure has certain behaviors. So if you're putting a plan in place, what that plan is going to rely on people doing certain behaviors, like reporting suspicious activity, completing their training, putting in proper tickets for software, not making modifications to their their hardware. You have to know that the people that work here are more likely to follow this procedure, or follow that procedure, or not follow this procedure, or want to comply with this or not comply with this. So when you're rolling out like BYOD programs and things like that, multi-factor authentication, all these things that we need to actually, make sure that our environment is secured, there is a point of matter of, you always know Bob, and you always know, Bob's not going to do that. Bob's going to, because I know Bob and I know how Bob operates, I know how Bob runs his team. So yes, there is a, gut feeling may not be a word that a lot of people are comfortable with, but there is definitely sort of an emotional IQ and sort of a cultural understanding that you have to successfully apply it, because you get off the textbook really, really quickly. We have a lot of things we can implement, but not everything is going to work at every company, and in every environment, things are going to work better or worse.
And it takes time, I think, to develop that, the EQ specifically for that profession. It's not something that you can do overnight. I think that's where seasoned professionals, they have that gut feel of which direction they should take. but it's something that's built on many years of experience. So, which, speaking of which, at what point in time did you know that you've taken the right path? Meaning that you're like, okay, this was a right decision to make, and then now I feel like I feel like this is really, I'm going somewhere. Do you remember that moment in time, or was it like just a period of time, or at what point in time you knew that you were doing something super valuable that's really in need?
I started to enjoy it pretty early on. I think like getting into it. So my first foray I had into it was working with the NERC, critical infrastructure protection standards, and implementing those. I felt I was on the right track when I got uh, in the early stages working with the drafting teams on it, where
Mm-hmm.
we were sort of roundtabling whether or not things made sense, whether or not things were applicable. I liked it then because it made sense to me to be around my peers and be around this idea of understanding that we were doing things that were useful, new and useful, and this was going to actually have contribution to the future. So I think early on I got an indication that maybe this is not so temporary. So that was the first thing, and then after that, when it became a such a I guess a lucrative hash of knowledge to have in there was mobility where we found out that we're going to be implementing this across a lot of different industries. This is sort of here to stay. That's also where I said, it was a great happy accident to be able to be in demand, make a living at something that you actually enjoyed from a fundamental level. So I think sort of it's like within a few years, how that concept of security went from non-existent and compared to speed and processing and program languages to being something that was so highly sought after and needed to be understood. It felt great, and it felt like we were kind of on the cutting edge of really writing and designing a lot of what now is considered basic industry standards.
I love that term, happy accident. I really do. I really do. I think it's embodies the whole idea of falling into something that you really enjoy, from a career path. Couple more questions. And every time you answer this, and this is great. Like I have like three other questions that I need to answer. I just have to make sure I have them in straight order. Talk to me a bit about the critical infrastructure. It's it's on the news a lot these days. We've seen some cases of impact to critical infrastructure because of due to the cybersecurity potential interference, and it actually is impactful to everyone in our day-to-day life. I think it started with the oil pipeline, and then it evolved from there to even the kind of the bridge incident in Maryland, and many others that maybe we may or may not know. And since you have a unique perspective on it because you're kind of close to the forces that be to trying to create some regulatory environment to protect these, what's your take on it? And it's a matter of national security. We are all in this together. Like I mean, it's amazing that if you look at all the moving parts, it's just incredible that we get up in the morning and everything just works. I don't know if people realize like how amazing that is. Talking about happy accident, maybe
Yeah, I
that's what it
mean,
is.
and maybe it's a great thing. Maybe it's a testament to the system working that people don't think when you turn on your faucet or flick your light switch that, hundreds, if not thousands of people did something right within, you know, seconds of you doing that actually made that happen. So yeah, overall, like our critical infrastructure is obviously our energy supply, transportation, banking, and healthcare. Those are if you want to generalize it, those are the general areas to where these are things that we need every day that are critical to our just survival as a country. And so that's why they're considered national security. So the infrastructure inside of that are the important things that actually make those runs. So My area is energy. So this is, power plants and transmission lines. This would also be the same for pipelines, any sort of energy supply that allows other things to function. It's a baseline thing. It's something that we have here in this country is we have, communications coast to coast, and we have energy coast to coast. So
And Lemon, we were just saying that we were like 3 meals away from chaos, right?
mhm.
And I would say we're also one tank of gas away from chaos.
if
What
that
do you think about that
if that
statement?
next tank isn't there. So all the things that are going on inside of there are all of this complex scheduling, all of this complex forecasting. Everything's just in time. So those, the trucks that are getting to the gas station, the pipelines that are flowing, the electricity that's flowing through the lines, the internet data, just like we're talking on right now, so that we can communicate. If we were not able to orchestrate that very complex, you know, um, symphony that's going on every day, things would have to shut down. For instance, if you have the communication taken out for a power plant, like let's say like a nuclear power plant, well, you're not going to run it if you can't understand, like if you have no visibility into what it's producing and what the readings are. It would be like, it'd be like driving a car with no dashboard, with the windshield covered up. So that's what we're protecting in terms of critical infrastructure is we're making sure that it's resilient and reliable for all the things that have to happen. And to do that, we're securing it by armor plating it, making sure that everything that should be happening, but nothing that shouldn't be. So no one there that shouldn't be, no software that should not be there, and that the information that's being relayed is actually reliable. So we want to make sure that if the reading, 100 miles away from you on the meter is, 900, that is actually what you're seeing, at the control room, so that you can actually make sure that these things are operating properly. Any deviation in that can have huge, consequences. We've had a few of those. We've had some, disruptions, and it does not take very long, and it does not take very much to set it off. So, in terms of protecting the critical infrastructure, the internals of it are, somewhat rote and somewhat, just mundane and everyday. But what we're doing, the reason that we're protecting is we know how important it is for those things to remain reliable from a day-to-day standpoint.
And are we making progress? I mean, it seems like a lot of it is, I wouldn't say legacy infrastructure, but I'm assuming there's some of the OT, devices are very much legacy, running on some archaic infrastructure like older CPUs. I know that and maybe some of it wasn't even designed with security in mind, which we have to add on a security layer on top of it, almost like the internet.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. A lot of the, I guess, core infrastructure software that we have is very old. It's just a step away from mainframes, or a step or two away, from just, basic operating systems and that sort of thing. Absolutely. So but there's a couple of schools of thought on that. Industries that run critical infrastructure on their OT side tend to be somewhat conservative, and I understand that. There's a idea here: if it's not broke, there's no need to fix it. So when you think about infrastructure, when you think about what's running the Hoover Dam, it's like, well,
What
it's
is rubbish?
probably some things that are several generations older than what's modern. That's not necessarily a bad thing. I think what we have right now is we've gone through a very long, decades long period of being in flux with how we're protecting our OT systems and our critical infrastructure, because you can modernize it, but then, you didn't want to move too fast. So you're intentionally several versions behind. You also have the disconnect between some of this stuff being so antiquated that there aren't ready, easy ways to sort of swap it out. And it's not like you can say, hey, we're doing an upgrade to the power grid. Power's going to be off from, Monday to, we might turn the power grid back on Thursday. That's going to be unacceptable. So also, when you're dealing with critical infrastructure, these are things that have to run 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
And by the way, that's not trivial as well. I think some countries have these design power outages, even
Right.
just power, but some people like spend some time overseas and, they have times of fixing. You don't have running water between Monday and Wednesday. So you have to put like water tanks on the roof.
Right. And that's, and this is something that is deemed unacceptable in the United States. And this is why from, from company to company or administration to administration, that is one of those points of pride for the United States. Our utility supply, our energy supply, our communication supply is a 100%, 99.59 level of reliability because Americans, people that live in North America, have gotten accustomed to that. And so for us to go backwards to, having, times a day where power's not working, water's not running, intermittent blackouts, like, some countries have to resort to because of supply chain and supply problems, it is not something that is palatable here. I mean, so that's what we're dealing with. And so we tend to be a leader there because of reliability, but also in terms of what we're doing with the systems, there's a point where OT systems are updating. If we talk about the history of where they came from, there was no cloud, obviously. Using our Hoover Dam example, it was not running on a cloud-based operating system when it was built. Most things were on-prem. Most things were very self-contained. And even going into the late 90s or early 2000s, very little connectivity in and out of these systems. The connectivity was basically between the control center and the generating asset itself. That was pretty much it. So there's kind of no open internet. You got kind of direct connections between them. What's happened there, and that worked. I mean, that actually worked. It's been working. So that makes that progress a little slower because you have to make the case for it. I think just in the last probably 5 years, and again, different experts would disagree with me on that. I'm gonna put it at 5. I think in the last 5 years, the case has been made clearer for more aggressive updates to OT technology. But I think that's really driven by supply and reliability. So, like I said, these systems have to forecast. They have to give out very exact numbers and information and they have to be programmed very specifically so that supply and demand are always matched and met. We were, doing that pretty well with the older systems for the type of demand we have. With the cost of energy being what it is, and with the supply of energy, not necessarily, getting, I would say this, but the demand of energy rising. So we have to get more of our supply of energy. Forecasting and basically, fine tuning the grid and numbers, essentially getting the most that we can out of every supply we have is more important. Well, that takes more computing power. This kind of puts you on cloud platforms, things that can compute, virtually way bigger
You're
than
talking about
server rooms have.
Lemon, you're talking about the smart grid, like the ability to
Right.
control the flow of energy to devices and then I guess the neighborhoods and so on, and be able to offset and potentially get some major savings
Mhm.
on the
And one aspect of that is that you're now matching supply with demand to a greater degree of precision, much greater degree of precision. And so this is actually making the case that if we're going to run a smart grid, because if you have a brand new refrigerator at your house and it's running on Android OS because it has a tablet in it and it's the most energy efficient thing, or a washer or dryer or some other kind of compliance, you have this very modern, Internet of Things device. Like, you might have a washer or a dishwasher that only turns on when the, power, the cost of energy is at a certain level. So it's doing some very complex things, but it's getting its it's getting its energy from something. I'll go like a Hoover Dam. It's getting its energy from a very old power supply that was running analog for the longest time. So where do these things sort of meet in the middle? Where do the demands for the need for all of this information, for all of this sub-second data, for this huge amount of information needed to run the smart grid, the smart meter on the outside of your house, that sort of thing, for you to receive these savings, for us to make sure that every possible drop of water that can be used to make hydroelectricity is consumed and is moved somewhere where it can be used, and not any of it's wasted. So, you won't get that with the closed OT systems. So they've had to open up. They've had to understand how they're going to interact with technology. The other part of that, though, is that they also can't be subject to random updates, untested software that has reliability issues. We don't have the same windows to test and adjust these things. So it's a slow move, but it's a move, and it's sort of something that's going to continue to roll out slowly, but is going to be necessary. And that in itself just creates a whole different security and threat landscape than we had before, because all of a sudden things to where it was a semi-closed system, it was running, kind of autonomously. The servers and everything that actually supported it were literally in a room next to the machine that it was actually supporting, to moving that outside of that. So in our security profile, when it's in a box, it's in a 6-wall, area where we can put a lock on it, we can put a camera on it. We can do that we have to move this out to cloud. It's going to be out here at a data center somewhere giving this data. There is this very slow, cautious move and migration to those sorts of things, where we have a history. Now, in addition to my repeated referrals to the Hoover Dam, and that's just it's an icon for, old mechanical operational technology that's part of critical infrastructure. This is the way that we made power. We built big plants to supply it. We have newer supplies coming on, and we have newer supplies coming on in greater numbers than we've ever had before, like renewable energy. So solar, wind energy, bigger, newer. They get to take advantage of not having the built-in legacy infrastructure in place. So OT for renewables, a lot newer, lot more cloud friendly, a lot newer technology friendly, a lot more friendly to meeting the needs of that new washer and dryer that you bought, and it talks to that smart meter a lot easier. But it's because they've been new entrants to the market, and they don't have sort of the legacy cost and the legacy infrastructure built up on them. So you see sort of difference. So this is one place where generally established power utilities were kind of leading the way on technology, mainly because that's where the supply was at. We see now that it's a little bit of a turn where when we're looking to modernize, renewables really lead the way. We kind of look at how are the major solar suppliers doing this? So the older utilities are learning new tricks from your newer entrants, because that's going to be the key to how we're going to be managing OT, in the near future and probably for the next several decades.
And I think that's where private industry comes in. They're typically leading the way from security, from innovation, and then they go out and work with these traditional, I would say, legacy providers that utilize, when I say utilize, it's the pun intended, utilize the the actual new systems for protection, for innovation, and so on. And you're right, these renewable energy require now additional security measures. They all have systems in place that communicate back. Anybody who's installed the solar panel on the roof knows it comes with a controller, and a controller connects to the cloud. And you even have your app typically. It shows you which panel produces which amount of energy. Pretty cool stuff. But you take that into like a grander scale, and you start having again more issues. Now we've seen what happened when we rely heavily on a system that is uniform. So with the CrowdStrike incident, with the updates and the issue that it caused, it was unbelievable the impact it had across industries, including critical infrastructure like transportation. And now they're saying, there's some controls in place that Microsoft is trying to retract the ability for a third party to look at the kernel level for protection, I guess, to rely on the third party device or the third party controls over the OS. What's your take on it? Was that a wake up call to us, I guess, relying heavily on a single piece of software to run everything, basically?
Yeah. It definitely was it was a wake up call to return to some basics that we had gotten away from. Generally, we would want to make sure that we control third party access and remote access, that we rigorously, test user
that's
acceptance.
basic, right?
Well,
This is basic stuff. This is not
it,
even
it
what you
is,
just
but
described as you coming back to the controls that are basic.
right. Well, we get into these problems in a very organic way. We were doing things very, very controlled. It was, very, very controlled. It was a very flow gate process, right? Request access. Okay, I'm going to test the patch. I'm going to test the patch in the sandbox. I'm going to test it again. I'm going to put it into an acceptance environment. I'm going to copy my environment. I'm going to run these tests against that. I'm going to swap my acceptance to my production environment. And, and I'm going to have these rollback plans. I mean, so we used to take all weekend to like move these things in. And it was a very controlled thing where, I'm going to give you a one-time passcode and get access to it. So yes, so we were doing that, and we knew that. And that was the procedure. That was the discipline that we had. But it was time consuming. And then we start to trust our vendors. We start to trust our partners. It becomes much easier in virtualized environments to give people access, because you think, well, if worst comes to worst, what's the worst that could happen? When you have things that go for so long and there's not a problem, you start doing things like going straight to production with patches that you should have probably put through more rigorous testing to make sure that there weren't particular issues in it. And then we get into this habit of, well, we did it one time, nothing happened. We did it 10 times, nothing happened. You know what? I think what we'll do is that we'll just let these things streamline through. We'll streamline that process, because, So I think when the CrowdStrike thing happened, it wasn't like a new problem. It wasn't like, oh, we've got to figure out a new way to fix this problem. It was, we need to go back to what we were doing. Those basics were there for a reason. So we didn't go forward. We kind of went back to like, yep, I remember when we were less sure about third-party access, about our vendors, and we were less confident that our vendors were giving us, fully tested patches. And also, so for the companies, that's what happened. But also it was a black eye for any software vendor or developers. Like, you're obviously not doing the rigor of testing that we would have been doing 10, 15 years ago in terms of like a software development company and how you would test your patches before you actually move them out as well. So it was a thing where, the absence of an issue sort of made us relax things in the name of efficiency. And we've learned that we can't take anything for granted now. And we're going back to things that would have stopped it. And it's regardless of what the intent was. Was it an actual cyber attack? Was it an honest mistake? Well, those measures were always in place so that we could address either one.
Yeah, isn't it remarkable that again, going back to, we needed a case like this to go back to the basics. And I've seen there's a directive now to potentially ban networking equipment that comes from overseas with certain manufacturers to, I guess there's worried about the softer bill of material and not knowing exactly what is running on these. And that's an unbelievable task, right? To displace all these networking equipment all over the place. Again, coming back to these legacy systems, what are you going to do? You're going to rip and replace, all those switches, routers, um, everywhere. I mean, it just the sheer amount of it is staggering.
I know mandates like that are always, they come with mixed feelings. I understand the idea, from one end, yeah, we want to control our supply chain. We want to make sure none of this has been tainted and that everything's working. But it's also, a huge uplift, obviously in money, but just people and effort that it takes to do it, especially working in critical infrastructure. So it's one of these things that some things are good ideas strategically. They may be good ideas from a regulatory sense, but are they practical when you're moving down to different levels and different tiers? And that's why I enjoy sort of working in a lot of the like think tanks and industry forums and things where we can sort of comment back on what these regulations should actually be and what they mean to people. Again, so you have players of all different sizes in critical infrastructure. You have very, very small producers, you have large producers. So being able to tier and categorize in terms of, again, going back to doing your risk analysis on them, that not everyone can afford or, to take, rip out hardware, put things to the highest level. And, should they have to, or should there be a more graduated standard? Should it be a more, should certain entities get more time to do that? Allow this, allow these things to at least get to end of life, so it's at their natural replacement. It's a kind of it's a tough question of which do you do? But I think what we found is that when you're trying to push things to push too much regulation, right or wrong, too fast at too high of a level, people will tend to try to spend more energy trying to circumvent it than to try to maintain security. So I think all these things generally, they really need to strike a balance of, applicability and reality to do them, because I would rather people be willing to wholeheartedly, come up to a standard that is, 3 times better than what we currently have, but not to the full extreme, than have a standard that is like, well, this is impossible to reach, so I'm just going to find ways around it. Because it's always bad when you get people to race to the bottom, and the standards that have been the most heavy-handed, that's generally what happens. It's not a good outcome for the industry, because companies, private industry is, they are beholden to their shareholders. They're profit driven. There has to be some revenue motive there, so they'll make choices. These choices are predictable. It's just game theory, based on what you do. So not all of the ideas that we want to do for supply chain are great. I tell people all the time, it's like, if you wanted 100% cybersecurity, if you wanted like zero chance of, your system having an issue, all you have to do is give me a 50-gallon drum and some concrete and just, bring me all of your infrastructure. Do we want that? If we don't want that, if that's not going to actually work, then we're going to have some level of risk and some basis here where we can say, well, there's an acceptable range of things that we can recover from versus an absolute.
Yeah, and then while we're doing that, we're continuously becoming more interconnected. In healthcare, there's connected beds that we are embedding devices everywhere. There's almost no escape from becoming more connected, not less connected. And a lot of these devices are design and manufacture first, and then adding cybersecurity controls over top. And I know there's some agencies that are like the FDA that now have the testing or the certification of devices as well from a cybersecurity, which we never used to have. So we're moving in the right direction, but I think that the rate of change is outpacing our demand and want for more secure environment.
hmm The Internet of Things has really changed the security game. I think that's one of the things, the more recent things that I spend a lot of time thinking about and working on the most. And that is that, we didn't have, Bluetooth enabled toasters, and we didn't have, refrigerators running Android before. And there's an import of that in terms of critical infrastructure. So, when we were looking to secure critical infrastructure, so, a lot of these places that critical infrastructure is managed and maintained, super secure. They're secure against weather. They might be 4 stories underground, reinforced, buildings. We have, reinforced dedicated cables and cable trays and all this stuff. We have a huge amount of security and, authentication on the actual machines that can actually run and touch these things. So these people are working in these extremely fortified environments, both physically and electronically, so that nothing can get to them. But then they didn't think about, again, the Bluetooth enabled toaster in the break room or the Wi-Fi enabled microwave that they just bought. And so now you're introducing this consumer product into this super secure environment that is now, your weakest link. That's now a point of ingress. So it's and the servers and the ways that these things run, the smart lighting that we want to have, all the things that we're having. There's not going to be a way to ban it. I'm not an advocate of like, okay, we can't have consumer tech. No, we're going to have consumer technology. That technology is also going to be part of our workplace. It's going to be part of things we're around. It is a completely different vector that wasn't thought of before. It wasn't thought of the fact that every single device you can have, every lamp or light or, it's going to be Wi-Fi enabled or Bluetooth enabled or, and even things that, you need, smoke alarms, those sorts of devices. And how do these devices play and interact with the super secure, architecture that we're used to building, but mainly just for our actual, human interface devices, our actual computers that we're working on. So yeah, and you're right, where a lot of this doesn't natively come with a ton of security. Plus, we've had multiple generations of just smart home or smart automation products already come out. So even if the newer ones are better, how many generations back are you, and what are the areas there? And we also don't have enough history on these things being exploited. And I'm gonna say this, and I'm gonna knock on wood right now, because I hope I don't just say this and speak it into existence, where we'll have the first cyber breach via refrigerator happen, this week. But that is definitely something that me and my peers, when we talk, it's something that we're trying to tackle, because we're like, well, that is going to be something that is a newer frontier, and it'll be another interesting chapter in, we're going to have this chapter on refrigerators and toasters and how to secure those. And just when we thought things that were settling down and not getting interesting anymore.
And speaking of new frontier, before we part ways, I would love to talk about the AI, quote unquote, talking about a major frontier, right? They just announced with ChatGPT, the latest version was given a task to test out, do a pen testing for a Kubernetes, and the Kubernetes crashed. So the AI engine basically decided to on their own to try to hack the overlaying container of what was holding the container, and do that successfully. So talking about a new vector that uh, I would say just the past 2 years. And companies and government is trying to control it. They're trying to have AI development and security controls associated with these large language models. But then we are competing against other countries in the development of it. So there's a lot to discuss. What's your take on it, especially as somebody who's sitting in some of these committees that these things come up?
It's going to be an unavoidable tool that we're going to have to figure out how to master. Companies are going to have a great need
Never
to,
before masters us, you're saying.
yeah, exactly. Well, but there's going to be a desire to use AI in the workplace for decision support. And, so we are all grappling with how to use it responsibly. I think from the security standpoint, what we want to do is make sure that we have alternatives that we have some level of confidence in, like language models that we do understand what the security is around, and we do understand, we can test them, we know what information they will and won't give, and provide those, which may not be the tool they want to use, may not be the feature set that they want to, but provide that as an alternative to them using things that are a lot, more untested or a lot more, untried, just essentially to, so that they don't just go out and get it and get it on the street, so to speak. So that's what we're doing. But what we're finding is that the demand for using artificial intelligence for business functions, for usually for intelligence and decision support, giving it a bunch of data and having it come back and do that, that is something that's insatiable and it's not going to go away. So it creates an absolute new issue for us. But, again, the answer to it is not banning AI at work. That's the worst thing a company could probably do, is say, I'm not allowing you to use AI.
Yeah,
This
I
thing is
think
saying, I
some
want you to use
organizations
this AI.
tried that, right? And then
Mhm,
end up biting them, meaning
mhm.
just like people, you don't allow them access the internet, so they connect to Starlink.
Yes. I mean, just, yeah, that happened on one of our naval ships recently. Exactly. So, that doesn't happen. That goes back to that EQ. That goes back to that, knowing Bob. I know what Bob's going to do. And if I don't let Bob use Copilot, he's just he's going to take it on a thumb drive. He's going to take it home and he's going to put this on Chat GPT. It's just that simple. So, that's where we are with it. And it's got scary pluses. It's got amazing, I mean, minuses or vice versa in it, but it's again something that we're stuck with and something that we're figuring out. So it continues to evolve. But what I do find, and I guess the thing I'll leave you in, is that the basics of security, the basic theory of securing data, is this idea that data is valuable. And so that's why people want it. And it's valuable because it creates, revenue for companies. And we have to have ways to make sure people who need to access it can access it, and also ways that people that don't need to access it can't. When we break it down to those simple things, the the basic methodology hasn't really changed. It's how we apply it. So a lot of times the key to something in the future is to keep it simple and come back to the basic principles of what's the very first thing we learned when we were kind of looking at, security methodologies, or, in terms of, being security professionals and getting our certifications. So that whole, Cerberus, and then, this just idea of what you have, what you know, how people get data. We tend to lose that because that sort of got baked into all of these things. And now we're getting these new problems and we're like, well, how do we handle these new problems? We handle these new problems the same way we handle the old problems.
Yeah,
What is
let's
it?
go back
What
old
is the need?
school.
Hmm. And yeah, I'm a big, I'm showing my age, but I'm a big fan of old school because I think that you can always make that work. That's always the objective. So that's how we're going to face this brave new world of Internet of Things, of AI, and everything that comes on, past it, is just go back and look at what is the objective and what is the reliability need and what is the resiliency factor that you can put in. Because at the end of the day, cybersecurity is not about, how many malicious attacks or whatever we thought. cybersecurity is about everyone having as normal of a day as possible so they can be as productive as they possibly can. I mean, we want it. We want you to experience absolutely nothing except what you want to.
That's why sometimes it's a thankless profession. If you do the job
Yeah,
really well, nobody knows that you're
exactly.
doing the job really well. Lemon, well, thanks very much for joining me today. Much, much appreciated. It's been awesome to have you on this show today. What's the easiest way for people to reach out to you to know more, consulting, just feedback, whatever the case may be? What's the easiest way?
Um, I think the best way would be is let's go with social media. I'm on LinkedIn. It's Lemon Williams, and my company is the Ionado Group, IONADO. And that can be reached at ionado.com. And David, thank you so much for letting me talk, which is something I love to do. And I appreciate the time today.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. And it sounds like I had a list of other questions we didn't follow up with. We might have to do a part B of this conversation, maybe dive into some additional topics. But until then, thank you very much for joining. Thanks to all who joined us today. Much, much appreciated. Until then, stay safe online as well as offline. I'll see you in the next episode.
Bye bye.
Thank you, Lemon.